At the will reading, my uncle laughed and said, "You? He left you nothing. He was embarrassed by you." My cousin winked and added, "We already moved into the house." I just opened my bag, placed the original will on the table, and watched the color drain from their faces. I, 32M, sat in that mahogany-paneled conference room watching my uncle's performance, and I have to admit, he was convincing. The lawyer had just finished reading what was supposedly my grandfather's last will and testament, and according to that document, I'd been completely cut out. Everything, the house, the business, the investments, all of it, went to my uncle and his son. My uncle leaned back in his leather chair with this satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He told me that Grandpa had been embarrassed by me, that I'd disappointed him by choosing to be a social worker instead of joining the family real estate business. He said it loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, his voice dripping with false sympathy. My cousin, his 26-year-old carbon copy, actually winked at me and mentioned they'd already moved into the house. The estate was worth close to $4 million. They thought they'd won. I didn't say anything. I just reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and placed it on the conference table. The original will. The real one. I watched the blood drain from their faces as I slid it toward the lawyer, who'd been Grandpa's attorney for 30 years. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like horror as he opened it and started reading. Let me back up. I need to explain how he got here. My grandfather built his real estate empire from nothing. He came to this country with $200 and a willingness to work 80-hour weeks. By the time I was born, he owned commercial properties across 3 states. My father was his only son, and my uncle, Dad's younger brother, joined the business right out of college. They were supposed to run it together, a family dynasty. Then my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. Drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. Grandpa took me in without hesitation. My uncle and his wife were already living in the guest house on the estate, and my cousin was just a toddler then. We all lived together, one big grieving family trying to hold itself together. Grandpa threw himself into raising me. He was strict but fair, always pushing me to be better, to think critically, to question everything. He used to say that money was just a tool, and what mattered was what you built with it. Every Sunday, we'd have breakfast together, just the 2 of us, and he'd tell me stories about the old days, about starting over, about the importance of integrity. My uncle ran the day-to-day operations of the business, while Grandpa focused on strategy and mentoring me. I worked summers at various properties, learning every aspect of the operation. By the time I was in high school, I could analyze an investment property as well as anyone in the company. Grandpa was grooming me. Everyone knew it. My uncle smiled and played supportive, but I caught the looks he'd give me sometimes when he thought no one was watching. Resentment, calculation, something cold. When I told Grandpa I wanted to study social work in college, the family dinner got very quiet. My uncle practically choked on his wine. He asked me if I was seriously going to throw away my future, waste all the opportunities I'd been given. My cousin, who was in high school by then, laughed and said I was probably just going through a phase, trying to rebel or find myself, or whatever. But Grandpa just looked at me across that long dining table and asked me why. So I told him. I explained that I'd spent my whole life watching money change hands, watching properties get developed, watching wealth accumulate. But I'd also seen what happened to the people who got displaced when neighborhoods changed, who couldn't afford rent anymore, who fell through the cracks. I wanted to understand that side. I wanted to help. My uncle called it naive. He said I was being ungrateful, that I didn't understand how the real world worked. Grandpa held up his hand and told him to be quiet. Then he asked me more questions, good questions, hard questions about my goals and my plans and what I hoped to accomplish. We talked for 2 hours while my uncle got progressively more red-faced and my cousin kept checking his phone in boredom. At the end, Grandpa told me he was proud of me. He said that anyone could learn to make money, but not everyone had the courage to choose a harder path because they believed it mattered. My uncle looked like he'd swallowed glass. I went to college, got my degree, started working at a nonprofit that helped families facing eviction. The pay was terrible, the hours were brutal, and I loved every minute of it. I still visited Grandpa every week, still had our Sunday breakfasts. He'd ask about my cases, give advice, challenge my thinking. He never once made me feel like I'd disappointed him. My uncle, meanwhile, kept pushing his son to take a bigger role in the business. My cousin had Grandpa's last name and the right pedigree, but he didn't have the work ethic or the judgment. I heard through family channels about deals that went sideways because of his carelessness, about clients who were unhappy with his attitude. Grandpa started spending more time at the office again, quietly fixing problems. 3 years ago, Grandpa had his first stroke. It was mild, but it scared him. He told me during one of our breakfasts that he'd been thinking about succession, about what happened to the business after he was gone. He asked me if I'd ever considered coming back, maybe running the social responsibility side of the company, using the resources to do good work. I told him I'd think about it. 2 weeks later, I was in his study going over some ideas when my uncle walked in. He'd clearly been drinking, and he got in my face immediately. He told me I needed to stay away, that I'd abandoned the family business and didn't get to come crawling back now. He said the company was his, that he'd earned it through decades of loyalty while I was off playing savior to ungrateful strangers. Grandpa overheard from the hallway and came in like a thunderstorm. I'd never seen him that angry. He told my uncle to get out, that his behavior was disgraceful. They screamed at each other for the first time I could remember. After that, things got tense. Family dinners stopped. My uncle and cousin moved out of the guest house and into a condo downtown, claiming they wanted more independence. I still saw Grandpa regularly, but now there was this undercurrent of worry. He seemed tired, distracted. He asked me several times if I had copies of important documents, if I knew where his safe was, if I understood his filing system. At the time, I thought he was just getting older, maybe a little paranoid about his health. Then, 6 months ago, Grandpa had a major stroke. He lingered for 3 weeks in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness. My uncle was there constantly, always hovering, always talking to doctors and nurses, positioning himself as the primary point of contact. I was there too, sitting by the bed, holding Grandpa's hand, reading to him from his favorite books. One afternoon when I was alone with him, his eyes opened. He looked right at me with this intensity and squeezed my hand hard. He tried to talk, but couldn't form the words, so I told him it was okay, that he should rest. But he kept squeezing, kept staring at me like he was trying to communicate something urgent. Then my uncle walked in, and the moment broke. Grandpa's eyes closed again. He died 2 days later. The funeral was huge. Business associates, employees, old friends, community members whose lives he'd touched. My uncle gave the eulogy, painting himself and Grandpa as inseparable partners who'd built everything together. He mentioned me only once, as the grandson who'd chosen a different path. It was subtle enough that most people probably didn't catch the dismissiveness in his tone, but I heard it. A week after the funeral, my uncle's lawyer, not Grandpa's longtime attorney, contacted me about the will reading. That should have been my first red flag. I asked why we weren't using Grandpa's regular lawyer, and my uncle explained that he'd switched attorneys about a year ago, wanted someone with more estate planning expertise. It sounded plausible enough, so I didn't push. The will reading was scheduled for a month out, which seemed odd, but not suspicious. My uncle said there were tax issues to sort through first. During that month, I was drowning in grief and work, trying to help my clients while processing the loss of the man who'd raised me. I didn't think much about the estate. Money had never been why I loved Grandpa. Then I got a call from Grandpa's old lawyer. He told me he'd heard about my uncle's attorney handling the estate and wanted to confirm that was correct. Something in his voice made me pay attention. I asked him what he meant, and he went quiet for a moment. Then he told me that Grandpa had been in to see him about 18 months ago to update his will, and as far as he knew, that was the most recent version. He suggested, very carefully, that I might want to check the safe in Grandpa's study before the official reading. I drove to the estate that night. My uncle and cousin had moved in immediately after the funeral, not even waiting for the will to be read. I'd asked if I could come by and go through some of Grandpa's personal effects, maybe take a few mementos, and my uncle had graciously given me permission like he already owned the place. The house felt wrong with them in it. My cousin's girlfriend was in the kitchen making herself at home. Their stuff was everywhere, already replacing Grandpa's presence with their own. I went to the study and found it mostly unchanged, which surprised me. I'd expected them to have cleared it out already. The safe was behind a painting of the old country, Grandpa's birthplace. I knew the combination. It was my birthday, something that made my throat tight when I realized it. Inside were stacks of documents, some jewelry that had been my grandmother's, and a thick envelope with my name on it in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a will dated 16 months ago, notarized and properly witnessed. I sat on the floor of that study and read it 3 times, making sure I understood every word. Everything, the house, the business, all investments and assets, was left to me. There were generous provisions for employees and several substantial charitable donations. My uncle was left a buyout package for his shares in the company, which were apparently minority shares despite his decades of work. My cousin got $50,000 for education or business startup costs, conditional on him actually using it for those purposes. But there was more. Attached to the will was a letter to me, several pages in Grandpa's slightly shaky handwriting. He'd written it about a week before his major stroke, like he'd known something was coming. In the letter, he explained everything. He'd discovered that my uncle had been embezzling from the company for years, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Nothing that would bankrupt the business, but enough to skim millions over time. He'd been cooking the books, hiding the theft behind complicated transactions. Grandpa had hired a forensic accountant and had all the evidence documented. He'd confronted my uncle about 6 months before his death. My uncle had broken down, begged for forgiveness, promised to pay it back. Grandpa had given him a choice: resign from the company with a fair buyout or face criminal charges. My uncle had seemed to accept it, had even signed papers agreeing to the terms. But then Grandpa's health had deteriorated, and he'd become worried that my uncle might try something. The letter told me to trust his longtime lawyer, to be careful, to make sure the real will was executed. He apologized for putting this burden on me. He told me he loved me and was proud of the man I'd become. He said he knew I'd do the right thing with what he was leaving me. I sat in that study for an hour, absorbing it all. Then I carefully photographed every page of the will and the letter, uploaded them to secure cloud storage, and took the originals with me. I also found the forensic accountant's report in the safe and took that too. As I was leaving, my cousin asked me if I'd found what I was looking for. I told him I had, smiled, and drove home. I contacted Grandpa's real lawyer the next morning. He told me he'd been wondering if my uncle would try to produce a fraudulent will, had been waiting to see what happened. We went through the real will together, verified everything was in order, and prepared our strategy. The lawyer asked if I wanted to stop the fake reading, confront them immediately. But I told him no. I wanted to watch them perform. I wanted to see exactly who they were when they thought they'd gotten away with it. So that's how I ended up in that conference room, watching my uncle's theatrical performance about how Grandpa had been embarrassed by me, listening to my cousin brag about already moving into the house, seeing them believe they'd stolen everything and gotten away with it. When I placed the real will on the table, the room went completely silent. My uncle's lawyer, some sleazy guy who'd clearly been paid to participate in this fraud, started stammering something about disputed documents and needing to verify authenticity. Grandpa's real lawyer cut him off. He explained very calmly that this will was properly executed, notarized, and filed with the court. He'd been waiting to see if another version would surface because his client had warned him there might be an attempt to subvert his wishes. My uncle found his voice then. He tried to claim that Grandpa had changed his mind, that the new will was legitimate, that I was the one perpetrating fraud. His face was purple, veins standing out on his forehead. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I let him rant for a minute. Then I pulled out my phone and started reading from Grandpa's letter. The parts about the embezzlement, the forensic accounting, the evidence of systematic theft over more than a decade. I told them I had all the documentation, that I'd already given copies to the police and the district attorney's office. My cousin went white. He looked at his father and asked him what I was talking about, if it was true. My uncle told him to shut up, which was answer enough. Grandpa's lawyer explained what would happen next. The fake will would be investigated as fraud. The real will would go through probate. My uncle would need to vacate the property immediately. And given the evidence of embezzlement and now attempted fraud, there would likely be criminal charges. My uncle stood up so fast his chair fell over. He called me ungrateful, vindictive, said I was destroying the family over money I didn't even want. He reminded me that he'd helped raise me after my parents died, that I owed him. His voice cracked on that last part, and for just a second, I almost felt something like pity. But then I remembered Grandpa's face in the hospital, trying so hard to tell me something. I thought about how my uncle had hovered over him, probably hoping he'd die before he could communicate anything. I thought about years of fake smiles and fake support while he stole from the company my grandfather had built from nothing. I told him very quietly that he didn't raise me. Grandpa did. And Grandpa had given him a chance to do the right thing, to resign with dignity and pay back what he'd stolen. Instead, he tried to steal everything and erase me from Grandpa's legacy completely. I told him that was his choice, and now he'd live with the consequences. My cousin tried a different approach. He told me we could work something out, that we were family, that surely we could come to an arrangement. He suggested splitting everything 50-50, like brothers would. The desperation in his eyes was almost funny, given how smug he'd been 20 minutes earlier. I asked him when he'd known about the fake will. He insisted he hadn't, that his father had handled everything. But I'd seen the wink, heard him brag about already moving into the house before the will was even read. I told him I wasn't interested in negotiating with thieves. The meeting ended with my uncle threatening lawsuits he'd never be able to afford and his lawyers suggesting everyone calm down and let the courts sort it out. I left with Grandpa's real lawyer, and we went straight to file the proper probate paperwork. Update 1. That was 3 weeks ago. The fallout has been spectacular. My uncle and cousin had to move out of the estate within 72 hours. The police investigation into the embezzlement is ongoing, and it turns out Grandpa's documentation was meticulous. The forensic accountant traced nearly $3 million that my uncle had stolen over 15 years. The district attorney is very interested in prosecuting. The fake will is being investigated as fraud. My uncle's lawyer has apparently turned on him, providing evidence that my uncle supplied the fraudulent document and knew it wasn't legitimate. Turns out when you hire a lawyer willing to break the law for you, they're also willing to betray you to save themselves. My cousin has been calling me nonstop, leaving voicemails about how his father kept him in the dark, how he didn't know any of this was happening. Maybe that's even true, though I doubt it. He's asked to meet several times to talk about Grandpa and honor his memory together. I haven't responded. The business is transitioning back to proper management. I've brought in an independent audit team to assess everything and repair the damage my uncle did. Several longtime employees who I remember from childhood have told me they're relieved. Apparently, my uncle's management style had gotten increasingly erratic and cruel over the past few years. People were afraid of him. I'm still working at the nonprofit, but I'm also developing a plan for the business that incorporates the ideas Grandpa and I discussed before he died. There's going to be a foundation that provides affordable housing and legal assistance to families facing eviction. Some of the commercial properties will be converted to below-market housing. It's what Grandpa wanted. Wealth used as a tool to do good, not just accumulate. I've also been going through Grandpa's personal effects, the things he actually wanted me to have. His watch, his books, all heavily annotated with his thoughts. Photographs of my parents I'd never seen before. Letters he wrote but never sent, working through his grief after they died. In one of those letters, written right after he took me in, he told my father that he'd make sure I grew up knowing I was loved, that he'd try to teach me what really mattered in life, that he hoped he'd do right by me and by their memory. Reading it in his study, surrounded by his books and his history, I broke down crying for the first time since the funeral.